separated the two groups. "You can't prove anything," the Thoraxian snarled, raising his weapon. "Dead witnesses tell no tales." He fired, but the energy blast dissipated harmlessly against the hatchling's field. Darwin, the always brave one, stepped forward. Its crystalline form pulsed with a pattern that seemed almost sad. The station's systems, overwhelmed by the combination of the syndicate's scans and the hatchling's display, began to fail. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in a red glow that mixed with the creature's natural luminescence. "Your neural inhibitors are offline," Vexterra announced, their mandibles clicking in satisfaction. "Along with your communications and weapons systems. The evidence has already been transmitted to multiple secure locations." The sound of boots on metal echoed through the corridors. Rask's backup team had arrived. The syndicate forces, realizing their position was untenable, began to surrender. The Thoraxian, however, wasn't finished. "You think this changes anything?" he spat. "There will always be a market for rare species. Always be people willing to pay any price." "Perhaps," Sarah acknowledged. "But there will also always be people willing to stand against you. And now, thanks to these remarkable beings, everyone will know exactly what they're standing against." The hatchling's energy field pulsed one final time, then slowly faded. As Rask's team secured the syndicate members, Sarah knelt beside her charges. They were tired but unhurt, their crystalline forms dimmed but still beautiful. "You were magnificent," she whispered. "All of you." Over the next few days, as Concordat investigators swarmed the station and news of the event spread across the galaxy, something unexpected happened. The story of 5 endangered hatchlings and their unlikely guardians became more than just a scandal about trafficking. It became a symbol of hope. Species that had long viewed humans with suspicion saw something different in Sarah's actions, not just compassion, but a willingness to stand against injustice regardless of who or what was threatened. The hatchling's display of intelligence led to new studies and protections for countless species previously dismissed as mere resources. 1 month later, Sarah stood in her newly rebuilt lab, watching the hatchlings explore their expanded habitat. They were officially under protection now, with Sarah named as their legal guardian until they reached full maturity. More importantly, they were helping to teach others about their species, working with xenobiologists to bridge the gap between crystalline and organic life forms. "They're not going to believe this back on Earth," she mused, as Darwin created complex light patterns for a fascinated group of xenobiology students. "They'd better get used to it," Rask rumbled from nearby. He had been appointed as the station's new head of security, with a mandate to create new protocols for protecting endangered species. "Your actions here have changed things. Humans are being requested as consultants on conservation projects across the galaxy." "And the syndicate?" Sarah asked. "Their network is crumbling." Vexterra clicked, entering the lab with a stack of data tablets. The evidence the hatchlings gathered implicated officials in 12 different systems. "Changes are coming, friend Sarah. Changes you helped create." Sarah watched as Mendel, usually so shy, demonstrated a particularly complex energy pattern for the students. The other hatchlings joined in, creating a harmonious display that filled the lab with rainbow light. She thought about the frightened creatures she had found hiding under fungi all those weeks ago, and the remarkable beings they had revealed themselves to be. "We all did it together," she corrected, smiling as McClintock broke away from the group to nudge her hand affectionately. "And I think we're just getting started." The hatchlings' glow brightened in agreement, their light reflecting off the station's walls and out into space through the lab's viewport. It sparkled among the stars like a promise, a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures and the most important changes begin with a simple choice to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Somewhere out in that star-filled darkness, other creatures needed help, other wrongs needed righting. But for now, Sarah was content to watch her unusual family thrive, knowing that their story had already begun to echo across the galaxy, inspiring others to stand up, speak out, and fight for what was right, regardless of species, origin, or the odds against them. It looked up at her with faceted eyes that seemed to hold galaxies within them. "Don't worry," she whispered, gently stroking its warm scales. "I won't let them take you. Any of you." Sarah Chen, the botanist who had come to study plants, found herself transformed into something else entirely, a guardian of some of the most extraordinary creatures in the universe. And as the sound of searching poachers grew closer, she knew this was only the beginning of a much larger adventure. What she didn't know then was that her actions that day would ripple across the galaxy, challenging long-held assumptions about humans and their place among the stars. But that was a story for another day. Right now, she had 5 scared hatchlings to protect and a group of well-armed poachers to evade. 3 days into the siege of NK-217, Sarah realized that surviving was going to be far more complicated than she had initially imagined. The poachers hadn't left the station. Instead, they had established a permanent presence, posing as a security contractor responding to alleged containment breaches. The auxiliary lab had become both sanctuary and prison. Sarah had converted her hydroponic growing chambers into makeshift habitats for the crystalline draconid hatchlings, using her knowledge of xenobiology to maintain the precise temperature and mineral content they needed to thrive. The 5 creatures had grown noticeably in just these few days, their crystalline bodies now the size of small cats. She named them after famous Earth botanists: Darwin, Mendel, Curie, Franklin, and McClintock. It helped her feel more connected to her own world, even as she ventured further into unknown territory. Each hatchling had developed distinct personalities. Darwin was the explorer, always trying to climb the chamber walls. Mendel preferred to observe quietly from corners. Curie seemed fascinated by the lab equipment. Sarah's tablet chimed softly, another official announcement from the station's compromised security network. She read it with growing concern. Mandatory inspection of all research facilities scheduled for tomorrow at 800 hours. Non-compliance will result in immediate investigation. "They're getting bolder," she muttered, watching as Franklin attempted to catch the light reflecting off her screen. The hatchling's scales rippled with iridescent patterns, a behavior Sarah had learned indicated curiosity. She had managed to maintain contact with exactly one ally on the station, Dr. Vexterra, an arachnoid xenobiologist whose ethics and dedication to science matched her own. Through carefully encrypted messages, they had pieced together the larger picture. The poachers belonged to the Obsidian Syndicate, a notorious criminal organization that specialized in trafficking rare species. A soft ping from her modified sensors warned her of movement in the maintenance tunnel. Sarah tensed, but the recognition pattern confirmed it was Vexterra. The arachnoid scientist emerged from the access panel, their 8 eyes blinking in adjustment to the lab's lighting. "The situation deteriorates rapidly. Friend Sarah." Vexterra clicked, their mandibles moving in agitation. "The Syndicate has installed monitoring devices throughout the primary corridors. They search methodically, level by level." Sarah gestured to her workstation, where she had pulled up the station's schematics. "They'll reach this section within days. We need to move the hatchlings, but where? The other biodomes are too exposed." Vexterra moved to examine the schematics, their eyes focusing and refocusing. "There may be a solution, though it carries significant risk. The station's waste reclamation system includes several large holding tanks. They are shielded to contain radiation, which would also mask the hatchlings' energy signatures. But those tanks are toxic," Sarah protested, watching as McClintock attempted to climb up Vexterra's leg, attracted by the scientist's natural bioluminescence. "The upper maintenance chambers above them are not," Vexterra corrected. "They are designed for emergency access but are rarely used. The radiation shielding would extend to those chambers as well." Before Sarah could respond, her security system flashed a warning. Heavy footsteps echoed from the corridor outside. Multiple sets, moving with purpose. "Security sweep. Open up," a harsh voice commanded, followed by pounding on the lab's door. Sarah's heart raced, but her mind remained clear. She had prepared for this. Just a moment, she called out, then turned to Vextara. Help me with the hatchlings. They worked quickly, gathering the 5 creatures into a modified specimen container. The hatchlings, sensing the tension, remained unusually still, their glow dimmed to almost nothing. Sarah activated a series of commands on her workstation, falsified research data that would appear to be uploading to the station's main computer. The pounding came again, more insistent. Final warning, Dr. Chin. Coming. Just saving my work. She nodded to Vextara, who disappeared into the maintenance tunnel with the hatchlings. Sarah took a deep breath, quickly surveyed the lab to ensure nothing was out of place, then opened the door. 3 figures stood in the corridor, wearing the black uniforms of the security contractor. Their leader, a scarred Thoraxian with cybernetic eyes, pushed past her into the lab. Routine inspection, he growled, though his weapon remained conspicuously ready. We've had reports of unauthorized life forms in this section. Sarah adopted her best confused scientist demeanor. Unauthorized. Everything in my lab is documented. Would you like to see my research permits? She gestured to her workstation, where complex botanical data scrolled across multiple screens. The Thoraxian's cybernetic eyes scanned the room methodically. You work alone here. Usually, though Dr. Vextara consults occasionally on xenobiological aspects of my research. Not technically a lie. We're studying the effects of low gravity on hybrid plant species. Fascinating work, though probably a bit technical for security personnel. She launched into a detailed explanation of her actual research, watching as the guard's eyes glazed over with scientific jargon. It was a technique she had perfected over the past few days, being helpful while being boring. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the Thoraxian held up a hand to stop her explanation. Enough. Everything appears to be in order. But be advised, any unusual energy signatures or unauthorized life forms must be reported immediately. Of course, Sarah agreed pleasantly. Though the only unusual energy signatures you're likely to find here are from my experimental fertilizer compounds. After they left, Sarah waited a full 10 minutes before opening the maintenance tunnel. Vextara emerged with the container, the hatchlings inside chirping softly in relief. We cannot maintain this deception indefinitely, Vextara noted, helping Sarah return the hatchlings to their habitat. The waste reclamation chambers may be our only option. Sarah watched as Darwin immediately began exploring again, seemingly unfazed by the close call. She had sworn to protect these creatures, and she would find a way to do it. But her friend was right. They needed a new sanctuary, and they needed it soon. Tomorrow, she decided. We'll move them tomorrow night when the station's power cycles down for maintenance. And Vextara, thank you for everything. The arachnoid scientist's mandibles clicked in what Sarah had learned was their equivalent of a smile. The universe grants us few opportunities to truly make a difference, friend Sarah. We must seize them when they appear. As if in agreement, all 5 hatchlings began to glow brighter, their crystalline forms creating a symphony of light that filled the lab with rainbow patterns. Sarah couldn't help but smile, despite the danger. They were worth any risk, these remarkable creatures, and somehow she would find a way to get them to safety. The waste reclamation maintenance chamber smelled of industrial cleaners and processed air, but it had become home. Sarah sat cross-legged on the metal floor, watching the hatchlings play among the makeshift obstacles she had created from spare parts. Their crystalline forms had grown larger still, now reaching her knee in height, and their ability to manipulate their own energy signatures had developed remarkably. A week had passed since the move from her lab. The chamber's radiation shielding had indeed proven effective at masking the Draconids' energy signatures, but Sarah knew they were living on borrowed time. The Obsidian Syndicate's search patterns were becoming more sophisticated, and their frustration at failing to find their prey was evident in their increasingly aggressive security measures. The access hatch cycled open, and Sarah tensed until she saw Vexterra's familiar form emerge. The arachnoid scientist moved with unusual urgency, all 8 eyes focused with intensity. "We have a significant development," Vexterra clicked, mandibles twitching with excitement. "I have made contact with someone who may be able to assist us, a former security officer from the Galactic Concordat." Sarah's eyes narrowed. The Galactic Concordat was supposed to prevent exactly the kind of situation they were in, but their enforcement had proven inconsistent at best. Can they be trusted? He was dismissed from service for being too aggressive in pursuing trafficking cases, Vexterra explained. "His name is Commander Rask, and he has been tracking the Obsidian Syndicate independently for the past 3 cycles." Before Sarah could respond, her modified sensors pinged an alert. Someone was accessing the maintenance shaft. Someone big. She gathered the hatchlings quickly, ushering them into their hiding space behind a false panel she had installed. The creatures went quietly, having learned the drill through previous close calls. The access hatch opened again, and Sarah found herself face to face with the largest Korthan she had ever seen. Korthans were known for their imposing physical presence, scaled humanoids that typically stood over 7 feet tall, but this one had to duck significantly to enter the chamber. His scales were a deep blue-gray, marked with scars that suggested years of combat experience. "Dr. Chen," he rumbled, voice surprisingly soft for his size. "I'm Commander Rask, former commander, technically." He held up his hands, showing they were empty. "Your friend Vexterra contacted me. I believe we have a mutual interest in causing problems for the Obsidian Syndicate." Sarah studied him carefully. His uniform was worn but well-maintained, bearing the faded insignia of the Concordat's Special Enforcement Division. More telling were his eyes. They held the same kind of determination she saw in her own reflection these days. "Why were you really dismissed from the Concordat?" she asked directly. Rask's scales shifted in what might have been appreciation of her directness. "I discovered that certain officials were being paid to look the other way regarding trafficking operations. When I tried to expose them, they arranged for my removal. Political convenience trumped justice." A soft chirp came from behind the false panel, and before Sarah could stop them, Darwin emerged. The hatchling had always been the most curious, and apparently the presence of a new visitor was too interesting to resist. The other 4 quickly followed, their crystalline forms casting prismatic light across Rask's scales. The former commander's eyes widened, but he made no move toward them. "Crystalline draconids," he breathed. "I haven't seen any since." He trailed off, something dark passing across his features. "Since the last nest I failed to protect." The hatchlings, far from being afraid, moved closer to Rask. Their scales began to pulse with a synchronized pattern that Sarah had never seen before. Mendel, usually the most reserved, actually approached the Korthan and extended one crystalline limb to touch his boot. "They're reading his emotional signature," Vexterra clicked excitedly. "This is unprecedented behavior for juveniles of their species." Rask knelt slowly, bringing himself closer to the hatchling's level. "The Syndicate's operation here is larger than you know," he said, keeping his voice low and gentle despite the gravity of his words. "This station isn't just a target of opportunity. They're using it as a staging area for a major expansion of their trafficking network." "How do you know this?" Sarah asked, though the hatchling's reaction to him had already begun to earn her trust. "Because I've been tracking their communications since they arrived. They've been bringing in specialized containment equipment, far more than would be needed for a single group of hatchlings. They're planning to turn this whole sector into a hunting ground." Sarah exchanged looks with Vexterra. "Then we need to do more than just protect these 5. We need to shut them down completely." "Agreed," Rask said, carefully extending a scaled hand toward Darwin, who had been inching closer. The hatchling chirped and allowed the touch, its crystalline form glowing brighter. "But we'll need help. I have contacts, other former Concordat officers who left for similar reasons. They've been waiting for a chance to expose the corruption." This is an extremely dangerous proposition, Vexterra noted, though their tone suggested excitement rather than disapproval. The syndicate's influence extends into multiple systems. Good, Sarah said, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And the more evidence we can gather, the more impossible it becomes for the Concordat to ignore. Rask nodded approvingly. We'll need to move carefully. The station's security systems are compromised, but I can help you set up secure communications with my network. We'll need proof, not just of their presence here, but of their larger operation. The hatchlings had arranged themselves in a circle around Rask, their synchronized glow creating complex patterns that seemed almost like a language. Sarah had studied xenobiology for years, but she had never seen anything quite like this. They trust him, she said, making her decision. And I think I do too. What's our first step? First, we secure this location properly, Rask said, standing carefully to avoid disturbing the hatchlings. Then we start gathering intelligence. The Syndicate thinks they're the hunters here, but they've never dealt with a team quite like this before. Sarah looked at her unlikely allies, an arachnoid scientist, a disgraced Concordat commander, and 5 crystalline creatures that seemed to become more remarkable every day. It wasn't the kind of alliance she had ever expected to be part of, but somehow it felt right. Together then, she said, watching as Franklin and McClintock began climbing Rask's boots, while Curie examined Vexterra's light patterns with scholarly interest. Let's show the Obsidian Syndicate why they should have left this station alone. The Obsidian Syndicate made their move exactly 2 weeks after Commander Rask joined their group. In retrospect, Sarah should have known they were running out of time when the station's power grid began showing unusual fluctuations. The Syndicate wasn't just searching anymore. They were using experimental scanning technology, burning through the station's resources in their determination to find the hatchlings. Sarah stood at her makeshift monitoring station, watching as red warning indicators spread across the display. The radiation shielding that had kept them hidden was failing, sector by sector, as the Syndicate's energy pulses overwhelmed the station's systems. They're getting desperate, Rask observed, his massive form casting shadows in the dim emergency lighting. Which means they're getting dangerous. The hatchlings, now nearly waist-high, huddled together in the center of the chamber. Their crystalline forms pulsed with agitated energy, creating a light show that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. They had grown so much, not just in size, but in awareness. Sarah had watched them develop complex behaviors, communicate through patterns of light, and demonstrate problem-solving abilities that challenged everything known about their species. Vexterra emerged from the access tunnel, all 8 eyes blinking rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. They have deployed neural inhibitors throughout the main corridors. They intend to incapacitate everyone on the station. Final sweep, Rask growled. They're done playing games. He checked his modified weapon, a non-lethal, but highly effective pulse generator he had assembled from spare parts. We need to move. Now. Sarah's tablet lit up with an incoming transmission, encoded using the secure channels Rask had established. The backup team is in position, she announced, hope mixing with fear in her chest. 3 ships waiting just outside the system's sensor range. But they need proof before they can move in. A violent shudder ran through the station, making the metal walls creak ominously. The hatchlings chirped in alarm, their glow intensifying. Darwin, always the boldest, moved to Sarah's side, pressing against her leg in what felt like a protective gesture. They're going to tear the station apart to find them. Sarah realized. We can't wait any longer. Rask nodded grimly. Then we give them exactly what they want, but on our terms. He pulled up a schematic of the station on his tactical display. The Syndicate's command center is here, in the former security hub. They're coordinating their sweep from that position. A direct confrontation would be suicide. Vexterra clicked, mandibles twitching anxiously. Not confrontation. Sarah said slowly, an idea forming. Revelation. She turned to the hatchlings, who were watching her with their faceted eyes. They have grown so much stronger than anyone realizes. The Syndicate is looking for helpless prey, but that's not what they're going to find. Understanding dawned in Rask's eyes. You want to use their own scanning technology against them. Force them to see exactly what they're dealing with. The hatchlings can control their energy signatures now, Sarah explained, her excitement building. We've all seen them do it. If they amplify their output at the right moment, while the Syndicate is pushing their scanners to maximum, the feedback would overload their systems. Vex Terra finished, their eyes focusing and refocusing rapidly. But the strain on the hatchlings. As if in response, all 5 crystalline draconids moved to the center of the chamber. Their forms began to pulse in perfect synchronization, creating patterns more complex than any Sarah had seen before. It was beautiful and slightly terrifying. A reminder that these weren't just endangered creatures, but beings with their own intelligence and agency. I think they've already decided, Sarah said softly. Another violent tremor shook the station. Warning klaxons began to sound throughout the corridors, the station's automated systems finally recognizing the threat to its structural integrity. We'll need to get them to the central hub, Rask said, already moving to secure the access tunnel. It's the only place where their energy signature will reach all the Syndicate scanning arrays simultaneously. Through corridors filled with neural inhibitors and armed hunters, Vex Terra noted, the probability of success is better than the probability of survival if we do nothing. Sarah interrupted. She knelt before the hatchlings, looking into their crystalline eyes. I promised to protect you, but now I need your help. Will you trust me one more time? The hatchlings' response was immediate. Their glow intensified, and they moved into a formation around her. Darwin and Curie in front, Mendel and Franklin on the flanks, McClintock bringing up the rear. It looked almost like an honor guard. Well, Rask rumbled, something like pride in his voice. I think that answers that question. Sarah checked her own equipment. A modified environmental suit that would protect against the neural inhibitors, and a small but powerful shield generator taken from Rask's private cache of gear. Vex Terra, signal the backup team. Tell them to be ready to move the moment they get confirmation of illegal activities. Rask, already on it, the former commander said, his massive form filling the access tunnel as he checked for patrols. Routes clear for now. We'll take the maintenance shafts as far as we can, then make a run for the central hub. Sarah took one last look at their sanctuary, the place where 5 remarkable creatures had grown from frightened hatchlings into something extraordinary. Whatever happens, she said to her unlikely family, we do this together. The hatchlings' crystalline forms pulsed in agreement, their light reflecting off the metal walls like stars in a private galaxy. Together, they moved toward the access tunnel, toward whatever waited above. The breaking point had arrived, but they would meet it on their own terms. As they began their ascent through the station's infrastructure, Sarah realized that this was more than just a mission to save 5 endangered creatures. It had become something larger, a stand against corruption, against the idea that might made right in the galaxy, and perhaps, just perhaps, it would change how humans were seen among the stars. The station shuddered again, but this time, Sarah smiled. The Obsidian Syndicate was about to learn a valuable lesson about underestimating both humanity and the creatures they had sworn to protect. The central hub of Station NK-217 had never been designed for what was about to happen. Its soaring ceiling and panoramic viewports were meant to showcase the beauty of space, not serve as a battlefield. But as Sarah, Rask, Vex Terra, and their crystalline charges emerged from the maintenance shaft, that's exactly what it had become. Syndicate forces had already gathered, their weapons trained on every entrance. The scared Thoraxian leader stood at their center, his cybernetic eyes glowing with triumph. Finally, he growled. The fools reveal themselves, his gaze fixed on the hatchlings, now fully exposed in the hub's bright lighting. Do you have any idea what those creatures are worth? More than you could possibly understand. Sarah replied, standing tall despite her racing heart. The hatchlings moved with perfect coordination, maintaining their protective formation around the group. The Thoraxian's laugh was harsh. Understanding. We understand profit, power, the practical uses of rare resources. What could a human botanist possibly understand that we don't? The station's sensors whined as they reached maximum power, the syndicate's scanning technology pushing them far beyond their designed limits. Energy readouts spiked across every display, exactly as Sarah had hoped. Now, she whispered to the hatchlings, show them. What happened next would be recorded in station logs, security feeds, and personal accounts across 3 sectors. The 5 crystalline draconids, creatures believed to be little more than valuable living batteries, revealed their true nature. Their crystalline forms began to resonate, not just with light, but with pure energy. The patterns they created weren't random. They were a language, a symphony of light and power that filled the entire hub. The syndicate's scanning equipment, already at its limits, began to overload. Impossible, the Thoraxian breathed, his cybernetic eyes trying desperately to process what they were seeing. They're just animals. They were never just animals, Sarah declared, her voice carrying over the growing hum of energy. They're sentient beings, and they've been gathering evidence against you since the day you arrived. On cue, every display in the hub lit up with data. Security feeds, communication logs, cargo manifests, everything the hatchlings had observed and recorded through their crystalline matrices. Their ability to absorb and store information had been grossly underestimated by everyone, including Sarah, until they revealed it to her days ago. The Concordat's response fleet is already on its way, Rask announced, his weapon trained steadily on the Thoraxian. Along with representatives from 5 different species rights organizations, your entire operation is exposed. The syndicate forces began to waver, some lowering their weapons as they realized the magnitude of what was happening. The hatchlings' display intensified, their combined energy creating a dome of light that Sarah Chen never planned to become a defender of alien species. Her research grant on Outpost Station NK-217 was supposed to be straightforward. Study the adaptive properties of xenoflora in low-gravity environments. But life had other plans. The station's biodomes stretched across the rocky surface of the moon like massive soap bubbles, their translucent surfaces refracting the light of the system's twin suns. Inside Biodome 3, Sarah was recording the growth patterns of her latest hybrid specimens when she first heard the sounds. A soft chittering, barely audible over the hum of the environmental systems, caught her attention. She set down her tablet and moved toward the source, pushing aside the broad leaves of her experimental plants. There, huddled beneath a cluster of bioluminescent fungi, were 5 crystalline draconids, each no larger than her palm. The sight made her breath catch. Crystalline draconids were one of the rarest species in the known galaxy, their bodies composed of living crystal that seemed to pulse with inner light. Their mother was nowhere in sight, and Sarah knew enough about their biology to recognize that these hatchlings were far too young to be alone. "Oh, little ones," she whispered, kneeling beside them. The hatchlings' crystalline scales flickered with nervous energy, casting rainbow patterns on the biodome's walls. Their species was worth a fortune on the black market. Their scales alone could power a starship's quantum drive for years. A shadow passed overhead, and Sarah's heart stopped. Through the translucent dome, she could make out the silhouette of an unmarked ship, its design distinctly different from the standard research vessels that frequented the station. Poachers. She didn't hesitate. Sarah shrugged off her lab coat and carefully gathered the hatchlings, who chirped in surprise but didn't resist. Their bodies were warm against her skin, vibrating with a frequency that seemed to resonate with her own heartbeat. "Security, this is Dr. Chen in Biodome 3. She whispered into her comm unit. Static was her only reply. The poachers must be using signal jammers. Sarah's mind raced. The biodome's main entrance would be too exposed. But she knew these gardens better than anyone. including the maintenance tunnels that ran beneath them. She had spent countless hours crawling through them to adjust the hydroponic systems. The sound of the airlock cycling made her move. Sarah tucked the hatchlings into her specimen carrier, cushioning them with soft growth medium. They huddled together, their glow dimming instinctively. She pulled up a section of flooring near the back of the biodome, revealing the access tunnel below. It would be a tight fit, but it was their only chance. As she lowered herself and the carrier into the darkness, she heard voices echo through the biodome. Life signs were detected in this section. A rough voice announced, "Spread out and search. These crystals are worth more than your annual salary." Sarah pulled the floor panel back into place above her head, plunging the tunnel into darkness broken only by the faint glow of the hatchlings. The tunnel stretched ahead like the throat of some mechanical beast, pipes and conduits running along its length like veins. She began to crawl, trying to move as silently as possible while keeping the carrier steady. The hatchlings remained remarkably quiet, as if they understood the need for stealth. The only sound was the soft scrape of her knees against metal and the distant thud of boots overhead. Her destination was the Auxiliary Research Lab, a small facility she had set up for after-hours work. It wasn't on the station's main power grid, and its environmental systems were independent. Most importantly, it had no windows and only one entrance, which she had modified with an extra security lock. The crawl seemed to take hours, though her chronometer told her it was only 20 minutes. Every sound from above made her freeze, heart pounding. Finally, she reached the access panel that would lead to her lab. As she pushed it open, a burst of weapons fire echoed through the station's corridors. The poachers weren't even trying to be subtle anymore. She pulled herself up into the lab, carefully lifting the carrier after her. The hatchlings chirped quietly as she set them down, their glow brightening slightly in the familiar environment. Sarah had spent enough time studying xenobiology to know that crystalline draconids imprinted strongly on their first caretaker. These 5 were now her responsibility, whether she had planned for it or not. She sealed the lab's entrance and activated her personal security protocols, a set of measures she had installed for protecting sensitive research data. Now they would protect something far more precious. As she settled in to wait out the search, one of the hatchlings crawled onto her lap, its crystalline form catching the light.